few years ago, while I was still ski racing, I was driving home from the mountains from this race, and on the way I was daydreaming. Probably you don't do that in KL in the traffic, but where I come from there are these big, long, winding roads, and I was going along and I was just off in this wonderful world. And I was thinking about my ski race. It had been a great race because for the first time in my life, I had been clocked at speeds of over 100 kilometers an hour. This was on one leg. Now, this is a sport where people sometimes die. People break bones all the time. They rip and they tear their ligaments. That happens very common. I stopped along the way and pulled into the self-serve gas station to fill my car up, got it all filled, grabbed my crutches, walked on in to the building to pay the cashier, and I went to the self-serve station because I was on a ski racer's budget and I didn't have enough money to go to the full-serve station. So I paid him, and as I paid him, he looked at me and his eyes got wide, and his jaw dropped, and he said, "Wow, lady, you are so courageous to fill your car by yourself at the self-serve station." Now, when he said this, it surprised me a little bit, considering where I had just been and what I had been doing. And I thought to myself, well, I'm cheap, maybe, but courageous, please. Ladies and gentlemen, courage is about extending out of our comfort zone. Courage is about facing fears that stand in front of us, pushing ourselves just a little bit. And honestly, for me, there was not a bit of courage required to fill my car at the self-serve station. I just need to interrupt for a minute. I see some of you taking notes. I want you to do a little exercise with me. Would you hold your books up in the air so I can see everybody's books? Okay? And would you take them and would you reach down and put them underneath your chairs? Put your books under your chairs. Everybody, you in the front row, you do it too. And leave them there. You'll get to take plenty of notes later on in the day. But this is a talk to sit back. I want you to go on the journey with me. I want you to feel what it is that I've felt and travel with me. You'll do plenty of note-taking later on. And another thing about this talk, I want to just talk to the women for a minute. So will you men forgive me? Women, let's see. We're going to try an exercise together. Would you all reach down with your, let's see, take your left hand, put it in the air. Well, men, you can do this too if you want. I saw somebody back there in about the sixth row, and the woman just nudged him. If you want to do this, you can. Yeah, I don't want you to be left out. Okay, reach down and take your left shoe and take it off and hold it in the air. Come on, I want to see some shoes in the air. Don't you get tired of these spiked heels? Now reach down and put it on the floor. Now, I cannot do this one with you, so you'll have to do it on your own. But would you take your right hand and remove your right shoe? I'll tell you, that one's really hard for me. Hold that one in the air, put it on the floor under your chair, and keep it there. I do not want you to put your shoes back on. This is going to be a comfortable, relaxed talk. And men, if you want to do it too, it's all right, but I'm not too worried about you. You usually do what you want anyway. Courage to take off your shoes. I gave myself an exercise there at the gas station because I thought, for me, this did not require any courage. But for somebody out there, it might require courage. I like to imagine people in different situations. And so I said, okay, for whom would it require courage? And I thought, and I said, well, I've spent my life with people on the physically disabled ski team. But I've also seen a lot of people who are mentally disabled, mentally retarded. So let's say there was a young man, he's 18 years old, he's mentally retarded. It has taken him 18 years to learn how to read. But he's finally done it. And he is so proud of himself. And so he goes with his mom and dad, and they drive into the self-serve station. And for the first time, he looks at him and he says, Mom, Dad, I want to go out there and I want to figure out how to do this and fill the car up. And Mom and Dad say, well, do you want us to come and help you? And he says, no, I want to try it by myself. And he gets out and he's really nervous and he tries hard to read the directions on the gas pump. And it takes him 5 minutes, 10 minutes to figure it out, but finally he does, and he lifts that gas pump out and he puts it in and he fills the car by himself. And when he comes back to his parents, he's got this grin on his face that spreads from ear to ear. And he says, I did it. I did it. I figured it out by myself. And he's so proud. For that young man, that day, it may have required courage to fill the car by himself. You see, the courage required for each of us in the very same situation can be very, very different. What it takes for you to do the same thing as me may require utterly different things. Pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. A lot of times when I talk about courage, people think, oh, that's Diana. She's talking about doing these great athletic things, skiing at 100 kilometers an hour, climbing these 350-meter rock cliffs. Great physical, wild, crazy things. That's courage. Yeah, that might require some courage. But that's not what courage is about. Courage is about how we live each and every day. Courage is about the risks that we take along the way, confronting our fears. It can happen in very quiet, very personal things. And for me, over the last couple of years, I found that I required a courage that was different than the big showy courage that I had as an athlete. A little over 2 years ago, on New Year's Eve day, I went into the hospital for a biopsy on my right breast. I had discovered a lump there. The doctors didn't think it would be anything. They said she's 29 years old and too young to have breast cancer. But when I woke up from the biopsy, they told me that yes, it was cancer. It was malignant enough that they felt they would have to remove my breast and to start me on chemotherapy for the second time in my life. I spent New Year's Eve grappling with my second encounter with cancer, second loss of a body part. And when I went home, I was angry. I said, this isn't fair. I've done this once already. I don't want to do this again. Why do I have to keep losing body parts? I don't like this. And then while I was sitting there, I began to think about those people that I mentioned on my ski team, who were, many of them missing not just one leg, but some were missing 2 legs, some were missing 2 legs and an arm, some were paralyzed from the waist on down, some were blind, and the blind skiers, if you wonder, would ski with a guide, and the guide would call out directions for them, yelling out, turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left. And you just really hoped that the guide knew their right from their left very well. But I thought about these people and I thought, Diana, what have you learned? And what I'd learned from these people is that wholeness had nothing to do with body parts or missing body parts. That wholeness had to do with our spirits, how we lived our lives. Were we living with personal courage? Were we doing the extraordinary for ourselves? Or were we living complacent lives? Wholeness had to do with living full lives. And so I said, all right, what's the breast for anyway? It's to nurse babies. I'll still have one left to do that, so it's all right. Now, that good attitude lasted for about 1 week. And then 1 week later, they got the biopsy results back, and they said it's a little more serious than we thought. And normally we wouldn't have worried about the left breast, but now we are. We want to test that side. They tested that side. It was also cancer, and they told me they'd have to remove both breasts. That was a little bit harder for me to deal with, because as a young woman who hadn't had children yet, I had always dreamed of not just having them, but of being able to nurse them into life. And to set that dream aside was much more difficult than setting aside the body parts. But finally, again, I thought about my teammates, and I said, all right, what really matters? What really matters is you'll be able to have children, Diana. That's what's important. And anyway, they were just a couple of breasts, and they weren't very big to begin with, so what's the problem? And I'm not saying any more about that. Gentlemen. My vision during that time was that I wanted to live life fully. I wanted to go through this time not fighting cancer, but loving life, loving every minute that I had, embracing every minute. And so I went forward, and about 10 days after my operation, I went to my first speech and had a great time. And then exactly 2 weeks afterwards, I decided, okay, time to go and get some exercise. So I went to the local pool in Colorado, where I live, in the States. Made my first few feeble attempts at swimming in the kids' pool. Went back into the locker room to change and shower, clean up. Now I have to tell you what this locker room was like. I don't know what they're like over here. I've only been to just the gyms at the local hotels. But at home, the locker rooms usually have these individual shower stalls. And you go in and you shower by yourself, you pull the curtain, clean up, get changed, and come back out. Fine. But this gym was a little bit different. It had this one big white tiled room with about 9 shower heads all around the room. And all the women got together, showered naked, and talked about the weather. This took me a little off guard. Now, normally I am not self-conscious about my missing leg. That's been since I was 12 years old. I don't worry about that. But this day, all of a sudden, I looked into this shower room, and for the first time in my life, I started to notice breasts. I mean, and there were big breasts, and there were little ones, and there were sagging breasts, and there were perky breasts. And all of a sudden, I felt so self-conscious because I didn't have any of this part that we as women so often connect with who we are. And I couldn't shower there. I was afraid of myself. And so I went home and cleaned up. Excuse me. When I got home, I thought to myself, and I said, all right, Diana, what's happening here? What's going on? And I realized that this fear I had was different than fear on the race course, which you could almost touch. But this was a very deep fear that I had about who I was now. And was I ugly? Was I different? I didn't like who Diana had become. And I give enough speeches around the world talking about dealing with fear and confronting fear to understand that I could not go through my life being scared of Diana, that was no way to move on forward. So I said, okay, what can I do to confront this fear? What can I do? And so finally, I took off my clothes, and for the first time since the operation, I looked at myself in the mirror. And it was really hard for me to look at myself. I didn't want to see Diana. I didn't want to see the changes that had happened to me. But finally I did, and it took about 10 minutes of looking, and I saw the scars on my chest, and I saw where my missing leg was, and it was a real honest look. I saw my thunder thigh from years of being a ski racer and my flat stomach that I consider my sexy part. And after about 10 minutes, I realized that yes, I had a rather unique body. There probably weren't too many of them like that out there in this world, but that it was mine, and that I had my own unique beauty. My own unique beauty that wasn't contingent upon what had happened with my body. See, ladies and gentlemen, each and every one of us has that beauty. And the beauty depends on what's in our soul, not what happens on the exterior. So 2 days later, I went back to the gym, swam again, and then when I was finished swimming, I went back to the locker room and showered naked and talked about the weather along with all the other women. For me, the moment of confronting myself in the mirror was a moment that required as much courage as anything that I had ever been forced to display on the race course. Again, courage can come in a very quiet, very personal moment that only you will know about, but it's some fear that you have to confront. We don't have to confront every fear. You know, sometimes after I speak, people will come up to me and they'll say, in this very embarrassed tone of voice, they'll say, Miss Golden, it's really hard for me to say this, but I'm terrified to try skiing. Now, they don't usually say that to me when I'm in Malaysia, but back in the States. And when they tell me that, they say it like it somehow makes them less than courageous people, wimps. And so when they say that, there's something that I always want to know, so I will ask them and I'll say, well, sir, well, ma'am, do you want to ski? Do you want to do this? And you know what the answer is 90% of the time? No, I don't want to do it. But I'm really afraid to try it, so I'm really embarrassed. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't want to do it and you're afraid to try it, don't worry about it. It's not important. It's not a fear that stands between you and your dream, you and your vision, you and your passion. We only need to spend our time facing the fears that stand between us and some desire that we have. The other thing that always strikes me about fears is that they're not always very logical. You know, that day when I was driving home from that race and stopped at the self-serve station, when I skied at 100 kilometers an hour, I stopped at some friend's house to have dinner. They had 2 young boys, one was 8, one was 10. And over dinner, I think it was the main course, The young boy, the 8-year-old, got this big grin on his face, an 8-year-old grin, and it made me very, very nervous. I don't know how you are when you see 8-year-olds starting to grin, but sometimes they can really be heading for trouble. And he looked at me and he said, "Diana, I got something to show you." And I got very scared then. And he walks over to the fridge with determination, opens the fridge door, reaches in, pulls out this white, plastic, opaque container, brings it back over to the dinner table, sets it down in front of me, pulls off the lid. I scream, "Ah!" Literally fall over backwards out of my chair. And do you know what it was? Fishing worms. I am terrified to death of fishing worms. I can ski at 100 kilometers an hour. I can climb 400-meter rock cliffs. I'm hanging out at 200 meters. I'm happy as a clam. Everything's great. But put a fishing worm in front of my face, and I turn into this quivering mass of jello. But as a ski racer, I did not very often encounter worms. As a motivational speaker, I don't very often encounter worms. So worms don't stand between me and any vision that I have, any passion, anything that's important. So that fear doesn't matter. Sometimes the courage that's required of us is the courage to just keep coming back. Maybe you're the salesperson. Again, think about the fear, excuse me while I digress for a moment, of picking up the telephone. What's the fear? I mean, does the telephone bite you? Are you going to die picking it up? And yet that fear remains for so many of us. And the fear is important if it stands between us and something we want. But a lot of times the courage that we have to find is the courage to do it over and over and over again when we fall down and we fail and we pick up the phone and somebody hangs up on us and we pick it up and somebody hangs up on us and we do it again to come back. And as a racer, I had to find that courage quite often. For me, probably the toughest time was after I had been racing on the disabled circuit for quite a while. And then I decided that it was time to start on the non-disabled circuit, racing against women on 2 legs. And I started in these open races, and I would finish middle of the pack, not at the very top like I was used to on the disabled circuit, but not at the very bottom. And I was kind of happy with that. I wanted to push to keep getting better and closer to the top women. And then after a couple years on that circuit, I was invited to race in this championship series for the best women in the world on 2 legs. And I was so excited to be able to race on this. And I went to the first race. And I was all set because I wanted to make my mark and show what a skier on 1 leg could do. And I got all set and did my exercises to warm up in the morning. And then I dived out of the starting gate. And I had this incredible run on the race course. It's the kind of run that you dream about having. And I was slicing this great line, flying down the hill, came through the finish line, knew that I was great. And then I looked up at the timing sheet to find my time, and I looked at the very top where the fastest people are, and didn't quite see it. And I kept on moving down this list, and I finally found my name. It was at the very bottom of the list. I was dead last. And I was furious. This can't be. I had this great run. How can I be dead last? Got to be a mistake. So I went to the second race, and I finished dead last. And I went to the third race on this series, and I finished dead last. 6 races in a row, I finished dead last. And I began wondering what I was doing there. Then after the 7th race, when I was sure that I was dead last one more time, I overheard this conversation between 2 of the women who had raced against me. And this one woman, she said to her friend, she said, "You know, I'm so upset. I finished dead last today." And when she said that, I heard a couple giggles out there. You know how I felt? I felt really good. Because I thought I had been dead last. But if she was dead last, that had to mean that I was second to last. And after 6 dead last finishes, I thought this is a great improvement. Well, the beginning of the conversation was so good, I kept on listening in on the rest. And this girl's friend, she said to her, "Sally, I'm really confused. I thought there was somebody else behind you." And Sally said, "Oh yeah, there was, but it's just Diana. She's only got 1 leg. She doesn't count." For me, that comment hit me like a fist in the gut. Because this was my dream. This was my passion. This was the thing I trained for every day of my life for years on end. And with this casual comment, she had just discounted me and everything that I was doing. I'm sure some of you are like me, but when you hear a comment like that, you get a little voice inside your head that starts repeating that comment over and over again and taking it to its extremes. And I got that voice, and it was saying, "She's right, Diana. You don't count. You're not important. What do you think you're doing here? Who are you trying to fool? You can't make a mark. You're Diana, you don't count." For the first time in my life, I was ready to quit as a ski racer. And I probably would have done it, but that night, I had this dream. And in this dream, I was fighting with my father. And I started off and I said to him, "That's it, Dad. I'm not racing on that stupid circuit any longer." And he said, "It's all right, Diana. You don't have to if you don't want to." And I said, "No, Dad, you don't get it. I hate it. I'm never doing it again." And he said, "It's all right, Diana. You do what you think is best." And I said, "All right, Dad, I'll do it." Obviously, it was not my dad making me do it. And what I realized when I thought about that dream is that we all have that little voice inside of our head that takes those comments that people just say to us. "You can't be a great salesperson. Who do you think you're fooling? Gosh, you haven't done well the last year. Do you think you're ever going to do well?" And so we start to replay those comments over and over and over again in our head. And that voice can be like a murderer that's going to kill our spirits and take our dreams away from us. And what I learned then is that we have to fight back against that voice and say, "Yes, I hear you, but I'm not letting you steal my dreams, the things that matter to me, away from me. I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and I'm going to go back and back and back as long as I love this thing." Another fear that stops us quite often is that fear of failure and the fear of embarrassing ourselves in front of our peers and the people that matter to us in our family. And as a ski racer, I very often face that fear also. The time when I faced it in its strongest sense was when I was invited to forerun a race called the Aspen World Cup Downhill. I'll assume that most of you are probably not skiers, and so I'll explain the terminology to you. First of all, a forerunner is not actually a racer. The task of the forerunner is very specific, to go out of the starting gate right before the race begins, to set the very first track in the snow, so that when the first racers head out, they have this line in the snow to follow, so you're the track setter. The Aspen World Cup downhill was a race, again, for the best women in the world on two legs. The downhill, if you've ever watched racing on television, it's the one where they have the helmet and the goggles on and they're going as straight and as fast down the hill as they possibly can. And this race was world renowned for being one of the steepest, most dangerous, nasty, vicious downhills in the world. And it had never been skied by an athlete with a disability. And before I was getting ready to ski this thing, there were all these comments going on, and people were saying, "No way, cannot be done by a skier on one leg. It's impossible." And the problem I faced again was that that little voice was talking to me inside my head, and that I myself, as I'm sure all of you have felt when you're getting ready to do something that's far more difficult than anything you've ever done before, that voice was talking to me. And I was thinking, I don't know if I can do this. And I don't want to fall down, because here's the best women in the world on two legs watching me, and all the best coaches from the ski teams all around the world, and the peers and my sponsors, and I want to do a good job, but I don't know if I can. And so there was this very loud battle, and this one voice was saying, "Hey, Diana, what are you doing here? This is stupid. This is really, really dumb." And then there was this other voice that was saying, "Come on, Diana, give it a shot. How will you know unless you try? How will you know unless you try?" Again, I'm sure that all of you know what it's like when you hear that second voice. It's like sometimes you just want to smother it. You want to choke it, to shut it up, because that's the voice that gets you to go through the starting gate. And the starting gate is always the fear zone. It's that place right before you get ready to launch out into the unknown area. And it doesn't matter what that unknown area is. That unknown area might be the physical race course. That unknown area might be the first cold call that you make as a salesperson. That unknown area might be changing career. You're going from sales into management. The unknown area might be buying a home for the first time in your life. But it doesn't matter what it is. When you're standing in the starting gate, you always face the same choice. Are you going to let your fears control you and paralyze you and keep you from setting out? Or are you going to meet your fears head on and move through them onto your course? It was that quiet, intense voice that got me through the starting gate of the Aspen race course. And now what I'd like to do for a few moments is to take you with me to the slopes, to give you an idea of what it feels like. So imagine, if you will, that instead of being here today in KL at the National Achievers Congress, that you're back in the United States and you're out in Colorado, and it's this bitter, cold, windy day. It's like minus 20 degrees out. And you're up at the top of the race course, and you're getting ready to ski this wild, crazy downhill at speeds of more than 60 miles an hour. And you've got your helmet on, and you've got your goggles on, and you've got that thin one-piece speed suit on. And the wind, it whips right through it, and it sends this chill down your spine. And the closer that it gets to start time, the more intense your fear grows until finally the starter calls out your name and he says, "Forerunner, 1 minute to start." And that's you. And you slide into the starting gate and you breathe in and you breathe out, trying really hard to control your fear. But it's not working. And then he says, "Forerunner, 10 seconds. And you put your poles over the start wand, and today, instead of having butterflies in your stomach, you got these snakes, and they're writhing and twisting inside of you, and you feel like you're gonna vomit from the fear. And to calm yourself down, you yell out loud your favorite start expression. "Come on, ski it like a woman, tough, strong, indomitable." But you don't really feel like that. And then he says, "Forerunner, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And on one, that tension inside of your head is so big that you think you're gonna crack up, go crazy, lose your mind. And then he says, "Go!" And on go, you dive out of the starting gate and you start pushing yourself along this top flat section. You're getting up to speed. You're at 40 kilometers an hour. You're at 50. You're at 60. You drop down into a tuck. You're at 90. You're at 100, 120. You look out and then you see the incredibly steep part out in front of you. And you're coming up closer and closer. And when you hit that steep part, you fly over the edge. And as you're up in the air, your heart goes into free fall. And as you land back down, it lands clunk into the pit of your stomach. And then you're on the steep section. And you get too far forward. And then you get too far back trying to recover from being too far forward. This is the edge of disaster. And your ski starts slipping out from underneath you and you pull it back in. And this is not like a graceful ski race. This is like, hang in there and go for a ride, kid. And suddenly you see the finish line out in front of you. But your thigh is on fire. And your leg starts giving out. And you feel yourself starting to fall down, and you fight that fall with everything you have. And you yell at yourself, "Come on, be tough, be strong. Don't be like a man now and give up." And suddenly the finish line is right there in front of you. And you come through. And ladies and gentlemen, forgive me. I don't really mean that very much. No, I really don't mean it at all. I just like to start trouble. In my nature, always has been. That moment, as you slide to a stop and collapse from exhaustion, this sense, first of all, of incredible relief comes over you that you made it down the silly thing alive. But then also incredible pride. That kind of pride that puts that grin on your face that spreads from ear to ear and makes you so happy that you just can't stop smiling. And the funny thing about that pride is that you were just a forerunner. All you did was set the track. This is not like when you win an Olympic gold medal. When you win an Olympic gold medal, you stand on the center podium. They hang the medal around your neck. The television cameras are on you. Photographers are taking your picture. Newspaper reporters want quotes. It's wonderful. It's glorious. But when you are the forerunner, nobody comes running up to you and says, "Congratulations, forerunner." doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because you set the track. And that was a track that showed you, sir, winning over fear. And it was a track that showed you laying it on the line for what you love, for your dream, for your passion. It was a track that showed you, an ordinary person with all the fears, with all the doubts, with all the questions, achieving something personally very extraordinary. Sometimes after I speak, I have been frustrated because people have come up to me and they've made comments comparing themselves to me. And they'll say things like, wow, Diana, you do so much on one leg. I don't even do all of that, and I've got all my body parts. I feel kind of guilty. Or they'll say things like, Diana, you've dealt with the loss of your leg so well, and other body parts. If that happened to me, I don't think I'd be able to handle it like that. If you take nothing else from my talk to take away with you as you listen to the other talks, please understand that I tell my story because it's the story that I know well enough to tell, my story. But that this is not about comparing yourselves to me. Each of you has your own story with the beautiful highs and the difficult lows. And this is not about dealing with some imaginary loss of body parts that hasn't happened to you. If it happens to you, the human spirit is so big. You'll find your way through it, and it'll be your way. It won't be mine. You probably won't become a ski racer, considering where you're from. And it's not about skiing at 100 kilometers an hour or climbing these big rock cliffs. Those are things that I do because I love them. It's about you finding what it is that you love, facing your fears, setting your track, your unique track. Don't worry, I'm not going to jump again. Sometimes we get to decide what starting gate we go through. We say, I'm going to push in my career, and I am going to be a great salesperson. I'm committing right now, this moment, to do this. Or I'm committing and I'm going to go run a 10K race. I'm going to do this. And then sometimes we're given starting gates that we don't like, and yet we have to go through them. Like me with the breast cancer or the loss of the leg, and how we go through them and what we do with our discomfort is just as important as the ones we get to choose. After I had both of my breasts removed and started on the chemotherapy, a few months later I went in to see a doctor for a regular checkup, and he told me that there was a growth in my uterus and that he felt that they needed to go in, it wasn't normal, and to remove it. And he promised that they would do whatever they could to keep the uterus because he knew how much I wanted to have children. That was so important to me. And when I woke up from that surgery, they told me the good news was it wasn't cancer, it wasn't malignant, but it was pre-malignant and would very likely spread, and they had to take my uterus. For me, that was such a difficult moment. That had been such an important dream in my life. A dream that I never wanted to set aside. And yet at that point, I didn't have a choice. Sometimes we have choices to go back and back and back again to our dreams. And sometimes we have to say, okay, now this isn't going to happen. It began a very difficult time for me, a time when I cried an awful lot. And then a couple months later, to celebrate the end of chemotherapy, I decided I was going to do something just for myself. And so I got myself a puppy. And my puppy was born on Valentine's Day. So her name was Prizzy, which was short for Prisoner of Love. And she was an angel, this little angel, like my first child. And for the next 5 weeks, she traveled everywhere with me, to doctor's appointments. I know you probably can't take your dogs here to doctor's appointments, but to restaurants in the States it's a little bit different. And she was a wonderful companion. And 5 weeks after I got her, she started having seizures. They couldn't stop them, and they finally had to put her to sleep. I don't tell that to make it like this tragedy. Actually, in the States, we used to have this television show called Queen for a Day, and whoever told the saddest story would win lots of appliances, ovens, toasters, washers, dryers. I mean, I would have had appliances to fill my house for the rest of my life. And that's not why I tell it, but to explain to you how far down I went. You see, here I was, and my vision was to go through this time loving life. And yet after Prizzy died, there were times when I didn't know if I wanted to be alive. I was as far from my vision as you can possibly get. And about a month after that, I finally got into my car, and I drove about 3 hours. My intention was to go jump off of these 1,000-meter cliffs. I decided it was just too much for me, and that I did not want to be on this earth any longer. And when I got halfway there, I realized that that was wrong, that I did not want to die, but that I just didn't know how to hang on. And so I called somebody to talk, to get some help. And a woman on the other end of the line, she said to me, "Diana, there must be something that will make you smile, something to bring you that deep joy in your life, to make you hang on, some light at the end of the tunnel." And I said, "I know. I want to find something, but I don't see anything right now. I just hurt so much." And she said, "Diana, look deep into your soul. You've got to find that thing that makes you hang on." And I said, "Well, Prizzy's breeder has this other little puppy that she's holding for me, but I'm scared to get him. I'm so scared. I don't want to lose anything else. I've lost enough." And she said, "Diana, you've got to take that risk. If you don't find the courage to care again, you won't be alive. Even if you go forward in your life, you won't be living." And so finally I turned around and I went the next day, and I got this little puppy who was this little tiny thing, 12 weeks old. Now he's as big as I am. He's about, I don't know in kilograms, he's about 100 pounds. And I named him Midnight Sun because I knew that he would be my light in the night, my bright spot in a very dark time. And he truly was. When I brought him home and I got him out of the car, he was so terrified of the world. He walked about 2 steps, he collapsed, spread-eagled on the ground. He looked up like, "Ma, this is just too scary. I don't know how to do this." And so I had to coax him. It took me about half an hour to get him to walk 50 yards to my door. A month after I got him, we were out for this walk. And Midnight reached down, and he picked up this big stick in his mouth, and he grabbed it like this, and he started growling at it. He went, "Rah, rah, 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 rah." And then he whacked himself in the head with it. He smashed himself in the butt. He tripped himself, fell over, looked up like, "Ma, what just happened? I don't get it." And all of a sudden, I laughed out loud. And it was the kind of laugh that comes from the bottom of your gut. And it's not a laugh that you put on for anybody else because you told a funny joke. It's not that kind of a laugh. It's the kind of laugh because you've seen something beautiful and sweet and worth living for in this world, and you just can't keep that smile down. That smile took me so by surprise because I realized that it had been months since I had heard that kind of sound from my mouth, a sound that had been very common in my life. And I realized that I was on my way back to thriving, to loving being alive with every moment that I had, my vision, my dream. Ladies and gentlemen, you have an exciting day ahead of you. Remember, don't compare yourself to us as speakers. We're here to encourage you to do what it is that you want to do, your heart's desire, to push your limits. Not for you to go away saying, wow, they were incredible and I can't be like that. You'll know when you achieve the extraordinary. You'll know it because it'll put that smile on your face that you just can't keep down, and nobody else might know. You know, they might look at you and say, what are you grinning about, looking so silly for? And you'll say, well, I just made 7 cold calls in a row and everyone hung up on me, and I'm going to do it again. Or they'll say, hey, you're looking awful pleased. What's making you so happy? And you'll say, oh, I just looked at myself in the mirror. And they'll wonder what it is that you see in the mirror, that they're not quite understanding it, but you'll know that you had the courage to look at yourself and the courage to find your beauty, your strength, when you didn't know if you could. Ladies and gentlemen, you have incredible beauty. Respect yourself. Set your track. Set your track. Thank you. Thank you.